Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah and today I want to plan for 2020 and share with you how I do that, what I use, and give you some hopefully inspiration and helpful tips on how you can make 2020 the best year yet. So let's roll the intro. So 2019 is almost over and it is time to plan for 2020. And I thought this is the perfect opportunity to share how I actually set goals and how I plan for the new year. So first of all, my setup consists of the Artist of Life workbook by Lavendaire. I already talked about this in my last video. It is basically a guide on how to figure out what you want in the year, how to plan your most intentional and meaningful year. It has a bunch of prompts and questions and stuff to figure out your goals and your vision for the year. So I'm going to be using that. And then I'm also going to be using my bullet journal to just write down some other things that are not in the Artist of Life workbook. And the bullet journal is usually what I use for planning weekly and daily goals and use it more on a day-to-day basis, whereas the Artist of Life workbook is more to plan the overall year and goals in quarters. So the first thing I'm gonna do before I plan the goals for the new year is to actually reflect on the past year and figure out what were some highlights, what were the things that worked really well, and what are the things that didn't work as well. Those are usually the things that will help you the most to grow and to figure out what works for you and what doesn't. Because with all planners, as much guidance as they can possibly provide, there's always some things that are just not gonna work for you personally as much. So it is always a bit of trial and error, and I like to go through my whole setup and figure out what worked for me and what layouts, what setups, what questions were the most meaningful and the most helpful to me. And then I'm gonna focus on using them to plan the new year. So after reflecting on 2019, it is time to plan 2020. And this is usually the most exciting part because I get to figure out what I want to do in a year. And that usually starts for me with figuring out how I want to feel and inviting an overall feeling and vision for 2020. The Artist of Life workbook actually has a place where you can put your theme for 2020. So that helps you to have like an underlying thing that you say, kind of like a mantra that you have in the back of your mind that goes with all of the goals that you set for the new year. So this is like the underlying thing of what you want 2020 to feel like. Then I like to do an exercise called Current Me versus Future Me. And I actually knew about this exercise way before I ever purchased the Artist of Life workbook. So I have done this a couple of times and I always find it so cool to look back on what I wrote in the past. So this exercise is basically you write down what your current you looks like, how they feel, and all of the things that relate to your current life. And then you do the same thing for your future self. So you envision what do they look like, how do they feel, what are some things that are going on in their lives, and all of these scenarios that basically you want your future life to look like in a year. And this exercise will help you realize what you have to do and what goals to set in order to bridge the gap between where you are now and where you want to be in a year's time. And it's also a nice memory to have of yourself. So I always like to look back at my past self and review that. So when it comes to goal setting, I personally think that it is super helpful to set goals within different areas of your life. So you're not just focusing on your career and completely neglecting your relationships and personal growth, but to set goals within different categories. So you're making sure that you're growing in all areas. And this is something that I did for the first time this year. And I thought that was super helpful because throughout the year, I could check back and see what area I need to focus on that I've maybe just neglected a little bit, and then refocus and make sure that I took some of those goals and planned them into the upcoming quarters and weeks. So I knew that I would get goals done from all areas of my life and I would have an overall higher quality of life. And to me personally, this just worked super well. So this is something that I can highly recommend. Another favorite of mine is writing a bucket list. This is such a classic, and I'm sure you've written your own personal bucket list, but it's really cool to just write down a ton of things that you want to do in the year, and especially those smaller things that might not seem like a big goal to achieve, like little things that you want to do maybe in your area, new cafes and restaurants you want to try out, maybe some new recipes, and all of those little things. And I look back at my bucket list all the time to make sure that I'm choosing some of the things from the bucket list and planning them in. Again, it is super easy to write a bucket list and then just forget about all of the things and look back at them a year later and realize that you haven't done any of them. So writing them down in one place and then looking back on them regularly is super helpful, so you can just make sure that you're scheduling them in throughout the year and checking them off. This actually brings me to my next big tip, and that is reviewing your goals as often as you possibly can. This is something that I'm personally still lacking a little bit, and I definitely skipped a couple of weeks here and there throughout the year, but I really want to make sure that I am reviewing my goals even more often in 2020. This will make the biggest difference out of all of them, especially if you're someone like me who tends to forget their goals. I know this sounds probably really stupid, but if I don't look at my goals and read them and see them as much as possible throughout my house, I literally will forget what I want to do. So I have to look at them, make sure that I'm scheduling them in, and I have to be reminded as often as possible. So reviewing your goals is the key to making sure that you're actually going somewhere with them. Speaking of reviewing goals often, it is now time to go over all of the goals that you set for the year and plan them into quarters. So the way I like to do this is to focus on 2 to 3 areas at a time, and then pick out specific goals from those areas that I like to focus on within that quarter. And then I go one step further and take each individual goal and look at the next 10 to 15 action steps that I have to do in order to meet that goal. And then those action steps are actually the things that I will write into my bullet journal to figure out when I'm going to do those individual steps. So I like to go and plan my big goals first, then set them into quarters, pick out the goals and write action steps, and then take those action steps and plan them into the week and then into my day. Because even though it sounds very logical, meeting goals is nothing more than doing tiny little things that might seem really meaningless and are probably not the most fun things. But doing all of those little things in a longer period of time will lead you to actually meet the goal that you set. Moving into 2020, I want to be even more structured with figuring out what I want to do within what weeks. As for now, I just planned like on the go week to week and kind of picked out some to-dos, but I want to make sure that I'm being a little bit more mindful at the beginning of the month of all of the things that I want to achieve and kind of already start to plan things into specific weeks. But as I said, have to be flexible because things are constantly coming up and moving around. Within my week, I have a to-do list of all of the things that I want to do that week. I also have 3 things to get done. This is a section that I added a few weeks ago. So I will always figure out what are the 3 most important things that I have to do within that week. And I make sure to do those first before I do anything else. And then I plan all of my days. So if I already have a to-do that has a specific day, I will plan it into that day. And if not, I will just leave it in the to-do column and then throughout the week kind of pick out specific tasks and plan them into the individual day. And at the end of the week, I will go over everything and make sure that I checked all the things off, and all the things that I didn't check off, I will move on to the next week, of course, providing that they're still relevant. This is also a really big thing about goal setting. It's super important to review your goals often and make sure that they're still relevant to you, because if they're not, then you just don't have to do them, even though you initially wanted to complete that goal. If it's not longer relevant or if it's not that much of a priority to you right now, then just move it to another time or let it go completely. That is perfectly fine. That's very healthy, actually. Yeah, and that is how I plan my year, my months, my weeks, my day, basically. This was a little bit more in detail than I originally planned, but I hope it helped you to plan your year as well. If you never tried intentional goal setting and planning, I can only recommend it. It has helped me so much throughout the year to actually go somewhere and meet my goals and achieve things that I'm proud of. So I can not recommend it enough. Yeah, I hope this video inspired you to set some goals for the next year. And yeah, other than that, happy 2020, happy new year. I hope this is your best year yet. And thank you so much for watching. If you have anything else to add to this video, leave it in the comments below. I would love to hear if you're goal setting and your process, if you have some tips as well. And you can always reach me on Instagram as well. I'm super active there, so go and follow me on Instagram. Other than that, happy 2020, happy planning, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!